Hey everyone, this is James Wilson with MTB Strength Training Systems and BikeJames.com, and today I want to talk about why your skills are stuck and why you're having trouble improving them. So most riders out there struggle with one or more of their skills, especially if you're talking about higher level skills like cornering or jumping. They get stuck at a certain point and they can't figure out, why can I not get better? There's more money than ever being spent on skills training between online courses and clinics and weekend camps and stuff like that. But despite all of that, riders still feel stuck. In fact, if you're listening to this, then odds are pretty high that you have done something. You've taken a course, you've tried to improve your skills, and maybe it improved a little bit, but eventually you hit this wall and you can't quite figure out why you can't improve. So the problem, and this is a huge problem in the mountain bike riding community in general, both with the average rider and also with the coaches who are coaching skills, is not understanding the difference between a movement problem and a skill problem. You cannot fix a movement problem with a skill. And so what am I talking about here? So your movement skills are the foundation for your bike skills. So for example, probably the easiest example, and this is the one that really got me thinking about this. If you look at your hip hinge, right? The ability to hinge your hips back and then push them back over your feet while minimizing the bend at the knees and keeping your spine relatively neutral. Like that's a basic movement pattern that we need as human beings. Now you use this movement pattern off of the bike in things like exercises like the deadlift and kettlebell swings and the dumbbell cheat curl. But on the bike, these are the foundational skills behind things like changing levels on your bike, so being able to get into the low attack position, things like manualing, bunny hopping, jumping. So if you struggle with your hip hinge, you don't have a really clean hip hinge, and you don't have some strength and power to put behind it, then you're going to struggle with these skills. Now, you may be able to get to a certain level, but again, if you're trying to figure out how can I improve and go past where I'm currently at, you need to figure out, is it my movement that is holding me back? So I've told this story many times before. This was like a real big aha moment for me in my journey as a strength coach for mountain bikers. Is I was at a skills camp and I'm watching the coach working really hard with somebody to try to be able to get down into the low attack position. And the rider was just struggling mightily with it. And when he got off the bike, I went up and I was talking to him, and I just kind of asked him, like, hey man, can you even touch your toes? And the guy could not touch his toes. He was like, good 12 inches away from being able to touch his toes. And that's when it dawned on me. I was like, man, this guy will never be able to smoothly get into and out of this attack position because he has no hip hinge. He's so tight and bound up in his hips that no matter how much coaching, no matter how many cues, no matter how much coaxing, whatever the coach was doing, they could not fix the movement issue with more skill stuff. And so what this rider really needed to do was work on his movement first, and then he would be able to apply it to the skill. So if you think about it, I like to think about it on a continuum, right? You have mobility. So this may be what's holding you back. So that rider not being able to touch his toes, he's got a mobility issue. Like he needs to fix his just basic mobility in his hips and his ability to, to be able to like easily touch his toes and just move in and out of the hinge position. And then once you have good mobility, now you need to work on improving the movement, which is like the actual movement skill of the hip hinge. So this would be doing things like, body weight, light movement, just getting the movement pattern down. And then once you have that down, you need to work on strength. And that's your ability to apply force consistently through that movement pattern. Now, once you've got all those things lined up, now you get on the bike and you're trying to apply them to the bike through either getting in and out of the attack position, manualing, bunny hopping, jumping, whatever it is. And you're going to have a much easier time doing it. In fact, I've found that fixing a rider's movement problem will clean up a lot of their skill problem. Now, again, you can definitely benefit, like once you have this foundation in place, from doing skills training and going to skills camps and stuff, but you're gonna have a much higher return on your investment with those things if you have the requisite mobility, movement, and strength to then apply to your skills. So when you look at the skills that we need on the bike, you can look at the corresponding movement skills, right, off of the bike. And so, for example, I've already talked about the hip hinge. That's probably one of the most important movement patterns for you as a mountain biker. You should have a rock solid, strong hip hinge because that is the foundation for so much of what we do on the bike. Your squatting movement pattern, this is the foundation for standing pedaling, right? Your, I call it the corkscrew hinge or windmill movement, your ability to twist your upper body while hinging your hips back. This is the movement pattern behind cornering. And again, most riders have never even heard of this, much less worked on it, and they struggle with it mightily. They don't even know they struggle with it because they've never even, practiced it. And then they wonder, why do I struggle so badly when I'm cornering? Besides that, you've got, you're pushing. So this would be your ability to support your upper body when you're standing up and also to absorb impacts. And then you've got pulling, which is your kind of He-Man lift, right? Like, preferably you're able to use weight shifts and kind of a manual to lift the front end up. But sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes, whatever the context is at the moment, you may need to just He-Man that front end up. And so that's your pulling. So again, that covers pretty much everything we do on the bike. Oh yeah, that corkscrew hinge is also one of the key movements behind riding switchbacks. So, that pretty much covers everything that you do on the bike. Like riding a bike is not super complicated. Like I said, like the skills that you need, we know what they are and they're pretty finite. They're not like a huge number. It's just everything you do on the bike is some combination of these skills being used together or, whatever that is, right? So you're applying these skills to the context of the trail. But again, if you're struggling with your skills, then you need to figure out like, well, is it a skill problem or is it a movement problem? So some of the exercises that I really like for improving these for the hip hinge, I've already talked about exercises like the deadlift, the kettlebell swing, the dumbbell cheat curl. I really like the dumbbell cheat curl because you can actually stagger your feet into like a pedal position. So you can make it very, very specific to riding your bike. And again, from a movement pattern standpoint, like I like the swing, but if we look at it from a movement pattern standpoint, your feet are wide and your hands are inside of your legs. And on the bike, it's the opposite. Our feet are narrow and our hands are outside of our feet. And so from a movement specificity standpoint, the dumbbell cheat curl is actually a way better movement and a way more specific movement for us on the bike than a kettlebell swing. So again, I love the swing. I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm just saying if we're thinking about this from a movement specificity standpoint and using your strength training to not only get stronger and fitter, but also to improve your skills on the bike, then the dumbbell cheat curl deserves a place in your program. With the squat, I like the goblet squat. I like lunges, split squats, Bulgarian split squats. Again, this is where you're keeping your torso more upright and there's more bend in the knee, right? So a squat is like maximum hip movement with minimal knee bend, and a squat is using the hips and the knees bending together to keep your torso upright. And so this is one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of the trap bar deadlift is because a lot of times riders use this to get around using a good hip hinge. They turn their trap bar deadlift into basic kind of a quasi squat. And so it's not that you can't move well with a trap bar deadlift. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that a lot of riders use the trap bar deadlift to mask their inability to actually perform a good hip hinge. And so instead of fixing the hip hinge and again, using a barbell to do it kind of forces you to do that, because if you don't, you're going to end up scraping the bar against your shins. To do a good barbell deadlift, you have to keep your shins vertical, which means that you're minimizing the knee bend and you're maximizing the hip hinge. So again, if you're very mindful of how you're moving, then you can certainly use a trap bar to do deadlifts. But this is why I prefer to use the barbell deadlifts, because it forces you to move correctly. like, again, you have to keep those shins vertical, and that's what you want to be practicing. So, but again, that's just, you want to make sure that you're not turning your hinges into squats. What you'll find in my experience is people tend to be either good squatters or hingers, and then they turn everything into that. Right. And so what you want to do is, you probably have one of those two things. You either find the deadlift or the squat to naturally be very easy for you, and the other one you struggle with. And so for you as a rider, the one that you struggle with is that low hanging fruit. That's the thing that if you clean up that movement pattern and you get better at that, you're going to see more results on the bike from that. So with the corkscrew hinge, I like the stick windmill, the kettlebell or dumbbell windmill. This is also where like a bent press comes in. So any movement where you are hinging the hips and you are creating like a corkscrew twisting movement through your upper body, those are great movements. In fact, I think that, if you did like a 30-day stick windmill challenge and you just did, 2 sets of 5 stick windmills on each side every day for 30 days, by the end of that 30 days, I will guarantee your cornering will improve without you doing anything specific to your cornering, because now that foundational movement is going to be better, and your body's just going to naturally apply that to the problem that you're presenting it with of cornering your bike. With pushes, I like push-ups, dumbbell bench press, floor press, any sort of pressing movement like that is great. And with pulling, inverted rows, dumbbell rows, again, any sort of rowing movement works well. So again, you want to round this out. I do like overhead pressing. Overhead pressing has a place. It's not as specific for our movement patterns on the bike. That doesn't mean that we don't want to work it, but if we're looking at, again, like, what movement patterns we want to make sure that we are using and emphasizing in the gym, then your vertical pushing and pulling, which is your kind of, chin ups and pull ups and your overhead presses, they're not as movement specific. So, but from a just overall strength and longevity standpoint, they are important. So we do need to make sure that they're in there. But you want to make sure that you are definitely emphasizing and working on those horizontal, like forward and back pushes and pulls, because that's going to have the most transfer over to the trail. So again, like I said, you will find that as your movement cleans up, that your skills will improve. And in fact, I think that, like I said, most riders are struggling with their skills because they are struggling with their movement, and then they're not fixing their movement. They are trying to figure out how to, apply some skills-based solution to it. But our bodies are natural learning machines. Like, you think about a child learning to walk. Well, really, it had to build a lot of requisite stuff before it did that. This is one of the reasons I like the original strength reset routine that I've done a video on, because it goes back and starts to like reset a lot of those movements, the ability to roll over, the ability to rock the hips, head nods, crawling, all of these things create the foundation for the ability to start walking. And now once a child goes through a period of time where they're working on these requisite things, then they start trying to walk. And again, the first time they try, it's, most times it's not successful, right? But then they try again and they try again and they try again. And their body is constantly learning and figuring out, how do I apply these foundational things that I have to this new higher level skill? And it will figure it out. Like I said, the body is designed to do that. So it's the same thing with on the bike. If you have those foundational movement skills, your body will naturally figure out how to apply those things to the problems that you're presenting it with on the bike. So again, I'm not saying that there's no room for, skill stuff. There certainly is, but I think that a lot of riders are putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. They're signing up for a skills camp when they can't touch their toes. Like, that is a bad combination right there. You're going to end up wasting a lot of time and money doing that, because you're just simply not going to be able to apply what you're learning at the skills camps effectively. So clean up your movement, get it strong, and then just, ride your bike, and you're going to find that a lot of things just kind of start naturally clicking for you and falling into place. So again, when you're looking at, I want to improve this skill, figure out, is it a movement problem or is it a skill problem? And, go back and look at those exercises that I mentioned. And if you struggle with those exercises, then well, you may need to go back one step further and figure out, well, is it a mobility issue? Like, am I like so tight that I have trouble being able to move this way in the first place? And so, but figure out where on that continuum you are, and then direct your energy to that place there. And that's what's going to give you the biggest return on investment for your time and energy. So I just hate to see riders struggling. Again, this kind of came up because I was, had a rider asking for some help with his jump form. And in watching the video that he sent me, it was very obvious that he struggled with his hip hinge, that he was not able to dynamically move his hips forward and back. And to hit a jump, you need to drive your weight into the jump, right? Like driving your hips, your belt buckle into the face of the jump is one of the most important things you can do to get good pop and form off of the jump. But if you struggle to do that, then you're going to struggle with your jump. And so again, my advice to this rider was to, keep practicing your jumping, but you need to fix your hip hinge first. Fix your hip hinge, get good with that, and then you're going to find that the jump practice is going to be more effective. So something I actually like to do is to do my workout, right? I always start my workouts out with some mobility work, and then I do my strength work, and then I'll go out and I'll do some skill stuff on my bike. And what this does is like I've trained my movement. I've kind of primed my body to move well. And so now when I go out on the bike and I start working on my skills drills, I've got this primed movement that I am applying to the skills drills. And so you'll find that you'll be able to move a little bit better and be able to, apply the proper movement to those skills drills. So just kind of something to keep in mind if you're looking for ways to, use your strength training and skills training together, is to maybe do a short, 10, 15 minute skill session after your strength training. So anyways, just something for you guys to think about. Just want to make sure that everybody is making the best use of their time, having the most fun that they can on their bike. Again, the nice thing about this is that, strength training also improves your strength and your fitness. And so for the 40 plus rider, right, you are losing strength. Like strength training is mandatory for the 40 plus rider, because once you hit 40, your strength levels are naturally going to start declining. And so if you're not doing something to mitigate that, then they're going to decline even faster. And so you have to be doing strength training. And so if you're going to be doing strength training, well, do it with your skills in mind and think about how you're moving. Again, this is another important point, is that this means that you have to be very mindful of how you're moving while you're doing your strength training. Don't just be chasing more, reps and weight and letting your form go. Or like I was talking earlier about, like, okay, doing like trap bar deadlifts, like that's great. But if you're doing trap bar deadlifts, but you're bending your knees a bunch and you're not really working that hip hinge, then, you're not really getting everything you could out of that exercise as a mountain biker. So again, just something for you guys to keep in mind. So if you want to find more tips like this, you can check me out at bikejames.com. You can sign up for my newsletter, and when you do, you get a free copy of my strength and conditioning basics for the 40 plus rider, where I go over the things that you need to be thinking about as a 40 plus rider when it comes to strength and conditioning, your strength training, your cardio training, and then also give you a free 4-week program to let you get started using good, smart strength and conditioning tactics. But again, even when you're doing that stuff, you need to be thinking, am I moving the way that's going to help me improve my skills on the bike? And that's going to just, supercharge your results, both by improving your strength and fitness and also improving your skills. So again, check me out at bikejames.com, and I'll talk to everybody next time.